The Caspian Sea was Moscow's untouchable fortress, but now it's a death trap. How did Ukraine turn Putin's trillion-dollar energy empire into a burning graveyard? Here is the full story.
The Caspian Sea. This vast body of water you see on the map has been Moscow's untouchable stronghold for centuries. The Kremlin saw this area not just as an energy basin, but as the main logistical artery feeding the war, transporting ammunition from Iran and fuel from Central Asia to the front lines. There was no enemy, no threat, only Russia's trillion-dollar energy empire. But that safe backyard is now a massive battlefield. Ukraine has permanently altered the geography of the war and turned this critical logistical corridor into a graveyard for the Kremlin's fleet. First, Putin's billion-dollar oil platforms went up in flames. Then, the most modern warship tasked with protecting this treasure was hunted down in its own waters. For Russia, there was no longer a single safe coordinate left on the map. The Caspian Sea basin is now a shooting gallery where Ukrainian drones roam freely. The shockwave created by the war in the Caspian's waters engulfed not only Moscow but the entire region, from the steppes of Kazakhstan to the Chinese border and even the shores of Iran, in a great spiral of panic. So how did Putin's safest basin turn into an international crisis center? To understand this series of operations, we need to see that this is not just a burning ship or a smoking platform, but a step-by-step strangulation operation planned with surgical precision. First, let's look at how these attacks were possible, namely the geographical vulnerability. Russia believed this region, 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, was inaccessible. This distance confidence led to the air defense umbrella over these facilities being much looser than in Moscow. However, Ukrainian intelligence began to punish this complacency from the beginning of December. The first shockwave came with attacks on the Filanovsky and Korchagin fields, Russia's largest energy assets in the Caspian sector. We must open a technical parenthesis here, because the targets hit were not ordinary wells. The Filanovsky field, with an estimated 129 million tons of oil and 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas reserves, is Russia's crown jewel in this region. Reports based on SBU sources indicate that the drones specifically targeted the gas turbine units and sensitive processing centers of the platforms. This is a technical choice. Repairing a pipeline can take days. However, if a gas turbine unit or control center is blasted, it means the entire system will be out of commission for months. Indeed, Lukoil's immediate need to halt production after the attacks shows that the damage was not superficial, but systemic. However, the most striking part of the story emerged when Ukraine, after hitting the treasure, also hunted down the guard protecting that treasure. Reports and images received on December 20th confirmed that a Project 22,460 Okhotnik-class patrol ship operating in the Caspian Sea had been hit. The identity of this ship was determined by OSINT analysts and Ukrainian sources to be the Rasul Gamzatov. So, why is the sinking of a patrol ship so important? The Rasul Gamzatov is not just a simple boat in the Caspian Sea. It was a modern 630-ton floating fortress, equipped with advanced sensors and a 30mm AK-630 artillery system, tasked with protecting oil platforms in the region from air and sea threats. As one of the most modern elements of the Caspian fleet, this ship formed an electronic shield and early warning system around the platforms. Ukraine striking this ship, right near the platforms it was supposed to protect, is a double checkmate move against Russia's defense doctrine. An analysis of the anatomy of the attack reveals that it was a complex operation managed by Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, or SOF. Allegedly, unmanned naval vehicles or aerial drones bypassed the ship's defense systems and caused damage to its hull. Footage showing the ship being towed away in smoke or remaining motionless reveals the severity of the blow it took. The primary mission of a navy is to protect the country's strategic economic assets. However, the picture we see in the Caspian Sea is this. The platforms that need to be protected are burning. The ship that is supposed to protect them is being hit, and the perception of security in Russia's backyard is collapsing. The timing and sequence of these attacks also reveal the helplessness of Russia's defense planning. First, between December 11th and 15th, the platforms were hit repeatedly. Russia, likely seeking to enhance security in the region, placed assets such as the Rasul Gamzatov on a more aggressive patrol schedule. However, the attack on this ship on December 20th shows that Ukraine read Russia's countermeasures and immediately punished its efforts to strengthen its defense line. A strong message is being sent that there are no longer any safe coordinates in the Caspian Sea for Russia to hide, rest, or resupply. Even before the smoke cleared in the Caspian Sea, the economic and logistical shockwaves created by these attacks began to reach Moscow's financial center. To view these operations as merely a military success would be an understatement. This is a multi-layered economic siege aimed at pulling the plug on Russia's energy ATM. The first and most tangible impact is the halt in production lines. Lukoil's forced suspension of production at the Filanovsky and Korchagin fields following the attacks means that a significant portion of Russia's production capacity in this region has been crippled. In terms of numbers, shutting down the valves of a field with an annual production capacity of 6 million tons creates a serious gap in Russia's cash flow, which is already constrained by sanctions. However, the crisis is not limited to the halt in production. The logistical exit routes are also in Ukraine's crosshairs. The main artery connecting Caspian production to the world is the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, CPC, terminal in Novorossiysk. The attack by Ukrainian Navy drones on this terminal and the rendering of one of its loading buoys, the single-point mooring, unusable, is a strategic blow to Russia's ability to sell its oil. Consider this. On the one hand, you cannot extract oil from the wells because your platforms are burning. On the other hand, you cannot load the oil in stock onto ships because your terminal has been hit. This is a full-blown logistical chaos scenario. The macroeconomic repercussions of this situation mean alarm bells are ringing for the Kremlin. According to data even acknowledged by state media, Russia's oil and natural gas revenues have fallen by 34% compared to the same period last year. This decline cannot be explained solely by market fluctuations. It is the drying up of the main source financing the cost of the war. Ukraine's strategy is to force Russian refineries and wells into a constant cycle of repairs, turning Russia into a country more concerned with repairs than production. As experts point out, metal fatigue and constant temperature changes could eventually lead to the complete failure of these facilities. More importantly, these attacks have wiped out Russia's image as a reliable supplier in the global energy market. For insurance companies, the Caspian Sea and the port of Novorossiysk now have war zone status. This means that insurance premiums for tankers carrying oil from the region have skyrocketed, increasing the cost of Russian oil and eroding profit margins. Even if Russia can sell its oil, it must now do so at a much higher risk premium and with much lower profits. This is precisely where the most dangerous aspect of the ripple effect comes into play, the fuel crisis in the domestic market. It is an ironic consequence of the war that an energy giant like Russia is struggling to provide gasoline to its own citizens. The long queues seen at gas stations in some parts of Russia in September and October, and the government's decision to ban gasoline exports, show how attacks on refineries have shaken the domestic market. The shutdown of platforms in the Caspian Sea is entering the equation as a new factor feeding this shortage. These disruptions in energy supply affect not only the fuel for tanks on the front lines, but also the daily lives of the Russian people, bringing the cost of the war directly to the streets of Moscow. Ukraine's multi-pronged attack strategy is dragging Russia into a resource management crisis. So, where will you place your air defense systems? On the front line? In Moscow? Or now on the platforms in the Caspian Sea? It is impossible to protect every point at the same time. By striking the Caspian, Ukraine is further depleting Russia's defense resources and turning the geography into a weapon against the Russian army. Moving beyond the tactical dimension of the incident and looking at the strategic horizon, we see that these explosions in the Caspian Sea are shifting the geopolitical fault lines of Eurasia. This is not just a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it is a moment of rupture, the collapse of Russia's hegemony over its backyard, and the beginning of its allies abandoning ship. The most striking strategic consequence came with Kazakhstan's move. Kazakhstan, which for years sent most of its oil to the west via the CPC pipeline through Russia, has made a historic change of course with the Novorossiysk terminal and the Caspian becoming unreliable. December reports indicate that Kazakhstan has put into action a plan to send oil from the massive Kashagan field directly to China, bypassing the Russian route. This is a diplomatic trap for Moscow. Why? Because for years, Russia controlled the flow of Central Asian energy to world markets, making these countries dependent on it. "I control the valves, I set the rules," it said. But now, its inability to protect its own territory and territorial waters is forcing countries like Kazakhstan into a pragmatic escape. Kazakhstan turning to China means that Russia is not only losing transit revenues, but also its geopolitical leverage over Central Asia. Russia's weakness is leading to an increase in China's influence in the region and a narrowing of Russia's economic hinterland. Another key player in this strategic landscape is the United States and the Western Bloc. Sources indicate that the winds have shifted in Washington, with Ukraine receiving silent approval or even active intelligence support for its attacks on energy targets deep within Russia. There are strong indications that the Trump administration and US intelligence have given the green light to play the energy card to force Russia to the negotiating table. This changes the nature of the war. The West is now shifting to a position that supports not only Ukraine's defense, but also Russia's economic devastation. The global decline in oil prices also increases the feasibility of this strategy. The fear that, if you attack Russian oil, prices will skyrocket, used to prevail. However, current market conditions and excess supply make Ukraine's closure of Russian valves tolerable for global markets. As a Western intelligence source stated, the understanding that the markets can handle this gives Ukraine the courage to expand its attacks. Furthermore, the sinking of the Rasul Gamzatov ship should be seen as part of the blind the bear strategy. This ship was not just a weapons platform, but a surveillance node. The blinding of radar capabilities in the Caspian Sea also weakens Russia's ability to monitor supply lines coming through Iran or other movements in the region. Russia faces the danger of being left blind and deaf in its own inland sea. As a result, the Caspian Sea front is pushing Russia into a multi-dimensional squeeze. Economically, its revenues are being cut off. Militarily, its defense line is being breached. And diplomatically, its allies are turning to alternative routes. Putin's image of a strong Russia is melting away along with the burning platforms in the Caspian waters. Ultimately, the rising smoke over the Caspian Sea heralds not only burning oil, but also the end of an era. By achieving the seemingly impossible, Ukraine has shattered the myth of Russia's backyard. That safe haven is now a trap. That untouchable energy ATM now shows insufficient funds. The message sent with the shooting of Rasul Gamzatov and the burning of the platforms is clear. There is no corner left on Russian soil, in its seas, or in its airspace that the war cannot reach. As the Kremlin faces the heavy strategic cost of failing to protect its own home, the world is redrawing the boundaries of Russia's power. And on this new map, there is no safe place for Moscow.
The smoke rising over the Caspian proves one thing: there is no safe place left on Russian soil. Is this the beginning of the end for Putin's war machine? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to Kristen News Update for more.